Hello and welcome to the Smithers Insight podcast. Today I'm joined by Colin Kerr. He has recently written our paper versus plastic report for us. Hi Colin, nice to see you today.
Hi, good morning, nice to be here.
So today we're going to talk about the paper versus plastic debate and the most recent report that you've been writing for us. I suppose the first question to kick this all off is, which is the favoured market and what will this look like in sort of 5 years' time?
So I think when we think about the use of paper and plastic today across the packaging industry, there are quite a few differences, particularly in terms of applications. In the context of the report which we've been preparing, thinking about the differences between applications between paper and plastic, our primary focus has been on consumer packaging applications. So more of the primary packaging type of application. And in that context, plastics has by far and away a bigger proportion overall of the material application than paper does. Whereas, of course, if you look at the packaging market more generally, paper and the related products coming from papers and carton and so on has a very large proportion because of the broader non-product contact applications in distribution packaging and so on. But for the purposes of this exercise, in more consumer packaging related, plastics has got 10 times higher application than paper has.
And do you think that will be the same in 5 years' time, or do you think paper's going to claw back some of that market share?
I think there will be a move towards increasing the use of paper in primary consumer packaging applications. And so we will definitely see a difference over time in terms of how paper is used. Nonetheless, the use of plastics for those types of applications will continue to expand, and therefore when you look at ratios between the two uses of materials, there won't be probably a huge change in the ratio, because both areas will grow. But in absolute terms, paper use for primary packaging applications will absolutely increase fairly significantly, I would suggest, over the next 5 years.
I suppose in terms of the material of choice, which pull or what is having the greatest pull on that choice? Is it consumers or is it regulatory efforts and sort of legislation?
So I think the starting point, of course, is that historically plastics had by far and away the biggest proportion for the bulk of consumer packaging. And of course, over the last, well, perhaps 8 years or so, and certainly the last 5 years, there has been a very significant increase in the pressure on the use of plastics. Of course, that pressure has come as a result of the evident challenges that plastics is leaving in terms of its end-of-life pollution. And as a result of that, there has been an increasing level of regulation which has been developed and is in many markets already in place, or in many other markets is planned to be in place over the course of the next 5 years. That, of course, has been in combination with many organizations putting in place voluntary commitments in terms of their intended reduction in use of plastics in a number of different ways, depending on the different organization. And of course, beyond the regulatory pressures which have been increasing, there has also been a significant increase in the broader societal pressures which have been placed on plastics. And of course, that's been very prominent in a number of NGO positions, and consumers have become increasingly aware of the challenges of plastics. not least through, the David Attenborough Blue Planet 2 and so on. And that has undoubtedly created an environment where there is a lot of focus on how to deal with the current plastics use. Now, in many cases, that has been a focus on ensuring that the existing plastics use is made in such a way it is designed to be recyclable, so designed for recyclability, that there is an increased use of recycled plastic in its content, that there is a reduction in the percentage of virgin plastic use. And of course, what we also see is calls for absolute reductions in total plastics use, although that is not yet anything which has got any formal pull. And what you see there is then, in amongst those types of commitments and the sort of regulatory environment in which companies are operating, you also see an increased expectation from consumers. And consumers vary a lot in their understanding and their interest, say, in the sort of challenge between plastics use and other alternatives. But there is a significant and growing swathe of consumers who expect the products that they buy to have a better sustainability profile, to either be reducing the amount of plastic or at the very least to make sure that the plastic that is used is recyclable. And there are certainly increasing numbers of consumers who are looking for alternatives to plastics and the role that paper products can play as offering a different solution for consumers, still maintaining the same product quality that the consumers rightly expect. And therefore we do see people moving towards the use of paper in a number of applications, and that is a combination therefore of addressing the regulatory challenges which are there, or the pressures to have an impact, the type of commitment that organisations need to be seen to deliver against, and consumer pressure which they're experiencing.
So I suppose drilling down into the regulatory framework a little bit more, do you think it works fairly across both paper and packaging materials, or do you think it favours one over the other?
There are different types of regulations which are either in place or which are evolving over time. And certainly some of those regulations are broadly packaging focused, so they capture all materials and they are not explicitly favouring one material over another, but they're looking at the impact of packaging in its broader sense and how to reduce that, the broader impact. So you do have some regulations like that, but of course there are also quite a number of regulations which have got plastic usage firmly as the focal territory. So where there are regulations coming in that are explicitly looking to reduce the or ensure the amount of recyclable packaging or recyclable plastic is in place, to increase the level of recycled plastics, to increase the use of refill systems or DRS systems, or deposit return schemes, and so on. Many of these are facilitated by the use of plastics, albeit not necessarily the only material. And I guess the other very large area where you definitely see a material-driven difference is in the way extended producer responsibility schemes have been developing, so EPR schemes. So these are schemes that are created by national organisations, or in some places, such as in the United States, at a state level rather than a national level, and they are imposing a tax per kilogram of material that's used. Generally, those fees have some sort of relationship to the level of recyclability which is present for a material. So a design which isn't recyclable in many cases attracts a higher fee than a material which is recyclable. I think there is a lot of focus, to come back to the original question, there's a lot of focus in many of the regulatory schemes around plastics and recyclability and recycled materials and the use of them. Yeah.
So I suppose back to sort of the paper versus plastic debate, how important has functionality been in that choice of material?
It has been right at the heart of the decisions that organisations take on whether they will use plastic or they will use paper. Yeah. There is always a starting point when an organisation is creating a product, innovation, whatever it may be. Very early on in that whole design process, there is a decision point that says what material type, or what are we looking for structurally, what are the product characteristics, what are the consumer requirements, what are XYZ, all the different things that need to be considered in a whole holistic design exercise. Now, there are certainly some product areas where that ability to move into a paper-based structure is less of a functional hurdle, because the product compatibility can be managed. You can create whatever level of functionality the consumer needs to use the product. You can create a solution which is robust enough to be able to protect the product through distribution and so on. So in some areas, functionality is relatively readily managed. Also perhaps in cases where the product contact time is relatively shorter. But equally, there are many other areas where the requirement to functionalize paper in varying forms has been right at the heart of what is the key unlock that is required if one wants to move more readily into paper-based structures. And that is in many cases principally driven as a starting point by the level of barrier properties that the paper or the functionalized paper can have, because plastics have, in most cases, the barriers that are required. Being able to replicate that in a paper-based structure is a significant functional challenge in many cases.
So I suppose in terms of like looking at the image of both of the materials, do you think each one has a fair image? I think sometimes we see plastic as being a bit of the worst, not the worst, but a different sort of option than paper sometimes. Paper sometimes seems as a bit more of a favourable option. Do you think that's a fair view of the market?
I think, of course, when somebody is thinking about that sort of aspect, understandably, in many cases, their starting reference in the plastics context is the litter that they see on the road, the images of consequences for wildlife, the negative aspects in terms of broader environmental pollution, which absolutely has been an unfortunate consequence of the way plastics have been used for many years. And plastics have certainly become demonized in many people's minds because of that. And understandably so. Now, of course, the reality is that inherently the material, which is why it has been used for the last 60 years, as a broad class of material, many different subsets within it, of course, but these materials are extremely functional, to use that broad term again, in terms of how they can be applied. But when you look at them holistically, if you don't have a mechanism whereby the theory of a circular economy can be genuinely applied, in other words, that a material can be used, it gets collected afterwards, it gets reprocessed, and it can then go back into a new product and continue in a closed loop cycle. Of course, that is the ambition for many, and if we can create the ultimate environment whereby those aspects of collection and processing avoid leakage into the environment and therefore can really create something close to a closed loop, then plastic has still got very much a place to play. I mean, there are certainly plenty of product application spaces which actually functionally it's very difficult at this point to imagine a material other than plastic. Paper, on the other hand, is still very much, of course, seen. When people think about paper, they think of a simple paper bag or a simple box or something, sort of an untreated, simple type of material solution. And people have understandably, had the view over years that actually that is a more sustainable solution. And in many cases, it absolutely can be. But of course, any material comes with its challenges. And so it is wrong to make a blanket assumption that for every potential application of paper, it will be a better environmental, quote unquote, solution than plastic, because it depends what you do to the paper. There are many circumstances where today packaging is the majority of it is paper, but it's got layers inside and outside and coatings and this and that and the other, all of which render the actual practical realities of trying to recycle in a paper recycling facility as they exist today to be not practical, and therefore some of those paper-based structures require specialist recycling infrastructure and are not getting recycled. And therefore people are rightly needing to make sure that any moves to paper are thinking about the broader environmental consequences. And of course, organisations need to look at the broad profiles of their plastic proposal and their paper proposal to make sure that actually ultimately, whichever route they may choose to go down, is actually overall giving the minimum environmental impact.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much, Colin. It's such an interesting debate at the moment. It's so nuanced in terms of sort of practicalities of applications of both materials across the board. Our new report, Paper versus Plastic, is available to buy now. Thanks ever so much.